Brewer Eberly is a third-generation family physician who now works at the Fischer Clinic in Raleigh, North Carolina. Brewer completed his family medicine residency and chief residency at AnMed Health in Anderson, South Carolina. He's a McDonald Agape Fellow in the Theology, Medicine, and Culture Initiative here at Duke. He completed the Theology, Medicine, and Culture Fellowship several years ago between his third and fourth year of medical school. And he later completed the Paul Ramsey Institute Fellowship with the Center for Bioethics and Culture. Brewer has published widely. He's had pieces in JAMA, the New Atlantis, Stat, Chest, as well as in theological spaces like Christianity Today, Comment, First Things, Plow, and Mere Orthodoxy. Brewer's artwork, you're going to see some of that today, has been featured on the cover of Academic Medicine and in the AMA's Journal of Ethics. While the majority of Brewer's time is spent caring for his patients, his research is rooted in the intersections of medicine, aesthetics, and Christian theology, with a particular eye toward medical trainee formation, the relationship between beauty and ethics, and the nourishment of weary clinicians. So if you're a weary clinician, be ready to experience some nourishment. Brewer's going to speak to us today with the title, Beauty Will Heal the World. And then, as is our tradition, we will open up for questions at that time. If you would, in the meantime, keep your cameras off and your sound muted. That will help. Thanks much. And welcome, Brewer.
Thank you, Far. It's really a delight to be with all of you and get us to full screen here. I'd like to open with a poem by Jack Gilbert titled A Brief for the Defense. Sorrow everywhere, slaughter everywhere. If babies are not starving someplace, they are starving somewhere else with flies in their nostrils. But we enjoy our lives because that's what God wants. Otherwise, the mornings before summer dawn would not be made so fine. The Bengal tiger would not be fashioned so miraculously well. The poor women at the fountain are laughing together between the suffering they have known and the awfulness in their future, smiling and laughing while somebody in the village is very sick. There is laughter every day in the terrible streets of Calcutta, and the women laugh in the cages of Bombay. If we deny our happiness, resist our satisfaction, we lessen the importance of their deprivation. We must risk delight. We can do without pleasure, but not delight, not enjoyment. We must have the stubbornness to accept our gladness in the ruthless furnace of this world. To make injustice the only measure of our attention is to praise the devil. If the locomotive of the Lord runs us down, we should give thanks that the end had magnitude. We must admit there will be music despite everything. We stand at the prow again of a small ship, anchored late at night in the tiny port, looking over to the sleeping island, the waterfront, is 3 shuttered cafes and 1 naked light burning. To hear the faint sound of oars in the silence as a rowboat comes slowly out and then goes back is truly worth all the years of sorrow that are to come. As a child, my dad, a family doctor, would hand me the covers of JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, torn lovingly from the journal itself. And I have hundreds of these covers saved. For my dad, JAMA's covers were a reminder to pause in front of something beautiful before taking up the work of healing. They were a reminder that patient care was an act of what Therese Southgate, the physician and art historian who curated JAMA's art for decades, called an act of, quote, long and loving attention. You can imagine my disappointment when, in 2013, The same year Dr. Southgate died, the same year the majority of physicians would no longer recommend medicine as a career to their children, the same year I started medical school. JAMA removed the iconic cover art in favor of a new design, a detailed table of contents. While previous healers may have appreciated the brief encounter with beauty, JAMA noted that an increasing number of readers wanted more efficient access to content. Early press releases were clear. Readers wanted to, quote, generate insights and access information more quickly. And I get it. As a family doctor, I too am scanning JAMA quickly for high-yield information and insights while trying to embody the ideal of the good physician, the kind of thing you see on display. It's been cherished for decades in Sir Luke Field's famous painting, The Doctor. But the message was clear to me then, only a few weeks into medical school, and reverberates 10 years later now. The days of long and loving attention seem over. Today, many healthcare workers only have time for short and efficient attention. They struggle to find beauty in their healing work. The cover art, so to speak, has been absent from the profession of medicine for a long time. Wonder is often replaced with worry, with a posture of control. And many clinicians today struggle to, as Jack Gilbert writes, risk delight. And yet, beauty, what a word. Present in the brilliant and bright and in the subtle and shadowed alike, it lingers around the warm meal prepared with love and laughter, surprises alone in the dark forest at dusk, gray in the winter under a cold rain, shines on the surface of the rings of Saturn. It is a word applied to beautiful faces, food, frames, fables, feelings, friendships, and formulas, showing up even in the last room on the left as the nurse, bent low, replaces a soiled pillowcase in the hidden quiet of the night. Clearly, speech collapses when we try to talk about it. I can't do much better than my middle son, all of 5 years old, who declared the following constellation of 3 sentences to me earlier this week. Quote, "Wow, Dad, look at this beetle. That beetle is so beautiful. I've never seen a beetle like that before." Beautiful things grab us. Wow. Immediately calling out to whoever is near to join us. "Dad, look at this beetle." We praise what we've encountered. That beetle is so beautiful. And then we compare it to the world we thought we knew. I've never seen a beetle like that before. Indeed, so what does the presence of this beautiful beetle now mean for my future encounters with other beetles, other creatures? Does it cause me to consider past beetles differently? Now that I've seen that which I've never seen, how should I then live? As the poet Donna Goya says of the beautiful, to encounter beauty is not only to find our attention piqued, wonder quickened, desire aroused, but to feel changed, becoming more than we were before. As George Steiner writes, the encounter with the aesthetic is the most ingressive, transformative summons available to human experiencing. The shorthand image is that of a terrible beauty, where gravity breaking into the small house of our cautionary being. If we have heard rightly the wing beat and provocation of that visit, the house is no longer habitable in quite the same way as it was before. A mastering intrusion has shifted the light. We can speak without contradiction when we say that something beautiful is arresting, stopping us in our tracks, rendering us slack-jawed and speechless, and yet say in the same breath that something beautiful moved us, quickening the heart, loosening the tongue into praise. And it is precisely because of this language of being moved that beauty and goodness, aesthetics and ethics are connected in mysterious ways that raise the question of what beauty has to do with what we do. This is why so many, from Augustine to Dante to C.S. Lewis to contemporary philosophers like Elaine Scarry, have claimed that beauty is a call, a beckoning bound up in the deepest questions of our vocations. This is why artists like Makoto Fujimura and authors like Roberta Amundsen, theologians like David Bentley Hart, Robert Barron, have drawn renewed attention to the via pulchritudinis, the way of the beautiful, with newfound vigor and urgency. As Elaine Scarry writes in her masterful book on beauty and being just, quote, "When we come upon beautiful things, they act like small tears in the surface of the world that pull us through to some vaster space. letting the ground rotate beneath us several inches so that when we land, we find we are standing in a different relation to the world than we were a moment before. We willingly cede our ground to the thing that stands before us. So what does any of that have to do with healing? I once opened up a conversation about beauty with a medical educator. She let me speak a bit before interjecting, but does it make any difference in patient outcomes? I think there's a lot we could say critically about what that question betrays about the medical imagination, but I think charitably, it captures an important concern of many who may be used to flowery, vague, sodden, effusive, soft soap language around beauty and the art of medicine. We might steelman this educator's question this way. Can we really make a meaningful distinction between the healing of one formed by beauty and the healing practiced by one who was not so formed? It seems to me that the health humanities, by which I mean art therapy, music therapy, visual thinking strategies, narrative medicine, graphic medicine, poetry, meditation, medical improv, all manner of arts and medicine interventions, have found a welcome and warm place in the medical academy. They have been and are being deployed both in medical education and at the point of care for many years now. We know that patients who have a window to a view to a tree heal better than those who do not. We know, or at least have heard it repeated, that exposure to humanities and participation in the arts can grow empathy, foster resiliency, sustain mindfulness, cultivate purpose and wisdom, strengthen a medical worker's ability to deal with ambiguity and uncertainty in medical decision-making. Physicians who read and enjoy poetry are more likely to cultivate trust, less likely to succumb to burnout. Medical students who learn how to draw go on to perform better in anatomy, maybe even surgery. We know engagement with art can activate perceptions that make for better healers, and all this is wonderful and to be celebrated. And yet, systematic reviews of humanities interventions and medical education over the last few years continue to make plain a skepticism over the contextual significance of the arts in medicine. And I don't mean to reduce the beautiful to the arts, by the way, though a lot of what I'll have to say today draws on the arts. Talk of beauty seems to galvanize only those who are already collecting JAMA cover art or memorizing poetry to begin with. In a 2021 comprehensive review in academic medicine of 769 arts and humanities interventions, only half appeared to have an evaluative component, and the ones that did tended to evaluate only learner satisfaction. The bulk of interventions focused on making the case for the arts, a case that has been made many times. As physician and philosopher Jeffrey Bishop memorably put it, medicine has been dutifully taking a humanities pill for so long without obvious benefit to either patients or clinicians that it suggests misdiagnosis, maybe even mistreatment. Art interventions that aim to cultivate attention through tours of the art museum, for example, may only further specialize and constrain the healer's sight, in which those that get better at dissecting the canvas become more efficient at dissecting the suffering person. Narrative medicine interventions aimed at deep listening may in the end simply train clinicians to skillfully interrupt, even mining patients for interesting reflections to submit later for potential publication, a phenomenon that has haunted me as someone who loves to write and someone who is taking care of patients. Even invoking the beautiful, so often an intensely personal and private experience, can perpetuate what the contemporary essayist Barrett Swanson calls the walled garden problem, the soft aestheticism of the collector, who carefully samples, curates, and arranges beautiful experiences within the garden of their private aesthetic life without ever sharing them with others, let alone reckoning with how those experiences of the beautiful might be shaping their imaginations, echoing outward, changing their actions or orientations to the world. Excuse me, guys. I've had a sick family all week, and I've still got a lingering little bit of that post-viral drip. Far from being the kind of healer refreshed and renewed to attend to the wounded in new and more fitting ways, the beauty-inclined clinician risks a self-satisfied feel-goodism, distracted from the sick directly in front of him. But there are other walled gardens we can draw on to think about this. My favorite is from C.S. Lewis's The Chronicles of Narnia, The Magician's Nephew. The lion Aslan has sent the young Diggory to a walled garden far on the outskirts of the newly created Narnia to retrieve a mysterious silver apple. There he encounters the villain, the witch Jadis, feasting on the silver fruit. Jadis tempts Diggory to keep the fruit for himself, to live with youth and save his dying mother. Diggory struggles, but ultimately resists, bringing a single precious apple back to Aslan as commanded, where he plants a tree that protects Narnia from evil for a time, and even bears fruit, which Diggory is permitted to take back to his world to heal his dying mother. There are ways of entering alone the walled gardens of private aesthetic experiences, while still recognizing that the beauty we find there is, as inscribed over the gate to Aslan's walled garden, quote, for others or for bear. This is not a private aesthetic life. Oh my gosh, thank you. That is so kind. Thank you. This is a beautiful act right here. Victoria bringing a cool cup of water. This is not a private aesthetic life that Diggory is engaging when he goes into that garden, but what the philosopher Calvin Surveld called the obedient aesthetic life. Take of my fruit for others, said Diggory to himself. Well, that's what I'm going to do. I think of Exodus 35 and the construction not of a walled garden, but of a walled sanctuary. Then Moses said to the people of Israel, see, the Lord has called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. And he has filled him with the Spirit of God, with skill, with intelligence, with knowledge, and with all craftsmanship, to devise artistic designs, to work in gold and silver and bronze, in cutting stones for setting and in carving wood, for work in every skilled craft. And he has inspired him to teach, both him and Aholiab, the son of Ahisamach of the tribe of Dan. He has filled them with skill to do every sort of work done by an engraver or by a designer or by an embroiderer in blue and purple and scarlet. Skipping ahead to chapter 36, verse 2. And Moses called Bezalel and Aholiab and every craftsman in whose mind the Lord had put skill, everyone whose heart stirred him up to come to do the work. And they received from Moses all the contribution that the people of Israel had brought for doing the work on the sanctuary. They still kept bringing him free will offerings every morning, so that all the craftsmen who were doing every sort of task on the sanctuary came, each from the task that he was doing, and said to Moses, quote, the people bring much more than enough for doing the work that the Lord has commanded us to do. The people bring much more than enough for doing the work that the Lord has commanded us to do. A dear friend taught me recently that this is the first time Scripture designates someone filled with the Spirit of God. Remarkable, given it is said of artists. The Creator stirs up the heart of the artist, filling them with the Spirit. And as the artists work and create, the community seems to overflow in almost gratuitous generosity, to the point where the artists and craftsmen themselves say, we have enough. Beautiful things have a way of disrupting the logic of modern healthcare that is so often built on maximum production and utilitarian charity. Consider Christ at Cana in John 2. Here we have the great physician starting his ministry not with cures in a clinic, but with drink making at a party. Christ does not turn water into penicillin, he makes wine. As Dietrich von Hildebrand wrote in his volumes on aesthetics, utilitarian charity is cool, calculated, and marked by utilitarian dryness. At Cana, we find this divine extravagance, this unlimitedness of charity, which reaches to the smallest detail of the best wine at the last. It is this divine tenderness which excludes no gift from its intention. And that says something profound about beauty's role in a world full of always more pressing work to be done and injuries to be healed. As in Gilbert's poem I opened us with today, the poor women at the fountain are smiling and laughing while somebody in the village is very sick. Another example from Matthew 26. Now, when Jesus was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, a woman came up to him with an alabaster flask of very expensive ointment, and she poured it on his head as he reclined at table. And when the disciples saw it, they were indignant, saying, "Why this waste? For this could have been sold for a large sum and given to the poor." But Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why do you trouble the woman? For she has done a beautiful thing to me." The NRSV translates a beautiful thing to a good service. See that link between the good and the beautiful, the aesthetic and the ethic. The King James renders it a good work, the message, something wonderfully significant. In Matthew 26 and John 2, we see two stories, one of Christ, one of a woman at Christ's feet, both acting out in superabundant generative beauty, doing something wonderfully significant, something that seems to be a waste. Turning water into something beautiful like wine, or taking something beautiful like a very expensive balm and pouring it out generously on feet that will be wounded. And in Exodus 35 and 36, we see this superabundance played out in community. Spirit-filled artists who seem to inspire the community to give more than enough. As Elaine Scarry writes, beautiful things incite the desire to bring new things into the world. Beauty creates, without it self-fulfilling, the aspiration for enduring certitude. It comes to us with no work of our own, then leaves us prepared to undergo a giant labor. So walls need not keep the beautiful locked inside, nor instrumentalize within the utilitarian dryness of the cool and calculated language of outcomes. Walled gardens can hold fruit for others. And that has important things to say about how we invoke the arts and healthcare spaces, whether in the built environment, medical education, and the health humanities, or even at the point of care. But again, what does it have to do with healing? Especially in a profession marked as it is by so much ugliness and suffering, the festering sacral ulcer, the toddler crushed in the accident, the traumatized mind, scarred and restless. It's one thing to build walls to keep beautiful things inside, but what if the walls keep ugly things covered? This is one reason so many philosophers, poets, and artists have been skeptical of beauty as a concept, let alone beauty as an ethical category. It seems unable to rise beyond mere taste, perspective, whim, idiosyncrasy, personality. Worse, it has the capacity to beguile in its glitter and pomp and rhetoric, tricking, dazzling, distracting from the wounds it claims to heal. My wife and I visited Dachau several years ago while in Germany. We were shocked to learn that one of the reasons the first Nazi concentration camp was built in that city was because it was associated with beauty. It was yet another subtle piece of propaganda to cultivate buy-in from citizens who might otherwise protest. How nice that this rehabilitation camp is housed in a city so attuned to the beautiful. Or consider the modern entertainment industry as an example of where ugly things like materialism, envy, violence, misogyny are dusted under the red carpets of entertainment, humor, and physical beauty. As Carl Truman wrote in a 2018 reflection on the Oscars, compare, for example, the sight of some Hollywood couple on the red carpet with the sight of an elderly husband caring for his wife of 50 years, upon whom Alzheimer's disease has inflicted its carnage. Surely the latter is more beautiful, and yet in a world dominated by the goal of personal satisfaction, the point needs to be asserted with vigor. In 2023, Rembrandt's The Jewish Bride on the left, honoring two unknown, unattractive folks timidly joining in marriage, is probably a meme somewhere, whereas the sight of John Krasinski and Emily Blunt, or Kanye and Kim Kardashian, constitutes a kind of modern iconography. But this problem of beauty covering up goes deeper. Just as beautiful things can distract from ugliness, the concentration camp housed in the beautiful city, the broken families hidden under celebrity, invoking beauty too easily, quickly, loosely, can worsen the very wounds it hopes to heal. One of my patients is a gifted visual artist. And when we first met, I began asking her questions about her art, rambling about the work and conversations I'm thankful to be involved with between artists, theologians, and ethicists about beauty, wondering if I might glean some kind of insight. And I'll never forget her sort of gently interrupting me, saying, that's very interesting, but I'm here because I'm in pain. She didn't want to talk beauty. She wanted a healer, a physician. And that was an extremely important lesson for me as a young doctor. It's such a small thing, and no harm was done, but it deeply convicted me over the moral failure of trying to draw out the beautiful from someone else's suffering. There is a tendency I've observed in Christian communities around healing, a tendency I've perpetuated myself in ways I regret, in which we perhaps too easily baptize pain through the language of blessing and the longing to find the beauty in suffering. In my eagerness to offer hope, claim redemption, forecast resurrection, to heal, I've made painful things that much more painful by claiming they may hold a hint at the beautiful. Talk of beauty when one has not found healing, when one is in the midst of suffering, claiming it too early, can feel impotent, brackish, cruel. As the band My Epic writes in their popular song Blacklight about a miscarriage, sing out the dissonance. It's awful, but it's time for the truth. Don't tell the half of it. You'll only end up twice as confused. Come on, this ain't a blessing yet. Come on, it isn't beautiful to say it is. And later in the bridge, it's been a long night, honey. I need to cry, but I'm fighting it off. And you're still shaking from the blood loss. And no good God would cause a thing so ugly. It leaves you cursing while you're trying to pray. This time, I think they're one and the same. Come on, this ain't a blessing yet. Come on, it isn't beautiful to say it is. The indie singer Lucy Dacus, who grew up a Christian and now considers herself irreligious, sings in her song VBS, streamed over 7 million times on Spotify, quote, "Your poetry was so bad, it took a lot to not laugh. You said that I showed you the light, but all it did, in the end, was make the dark feel darker than before." It has been my experience that bad poetry makes the dark feel darker than before because it doesn't tell the truth. It obscures it, bends it, forces it into a narrative of closed harmonies and tight epistemic circles in which everything works for good, perhaps too early. It claims a blessing too early. It says something is beautiful that is really maybe just ugly. Good poetry, real beauty, has a way of affirming reality and then changing our orientation to it. It doesn't make the darkness feel darker than before. It affirms the darkness as dark and shows the light all at the same time. And it has been my experience that one of the most mysterious effects of the beautiful in the work of healing is that it seems to beckon you back to the dark places, not to wallow or sink or revel or dramatize, but in a way that now has eyes to see others who may be trapped in the darkness, longing for healing. Indeed, in the Japanese tradition of wabi-sabi, beauty is found in what is quiet, transient, unnoticed, or even blemished or scarred. There's an emphasis on what artist Matazo Kayama calls the third color of lament, suggested by metallic pigments, gold, aluminum, platinum, and silver. It gives a whole new read to why Lewis said silver apples and not bronze or golden apples. Silver tarnishes to charcoal black when exposed to air, as in Makoto Fujimura's Still Point Evening, painted in the wake of 9/11. Similar is the art of kintsugi, an increasingly popular concept over the last several years, meaning golden injury, golden mending, or gilded fracture. If you were a fan of Ted Lasso, this is what Nate does when he repairs the Believe poster at the end of the series. in which artists mend shattered pottery with sutures of gold. Kintsugi highlights brokenness while also restoring wholeness, and it does so slowly. Here is an aesthetic that finds beauty in injury and crowns wounds with gold in their time. Like wabi-sabi, it resists perfectionism and seeks what is scarred, and it orients towards injuries that need healing. To give another example, it's difficult for me to hear the Beatles song Eleanor Rigby and not be primed to start noticing all the lonely people. Where do they all come from? And I highly recommend Cody Fry's Grammy-nominated orchestral cover of Eleanor Rigby, by the way. Sometimes that chorus enters my head as I enter our waiting room and look at my patients, and it moves me to wonder where, indeed, the lonely come from. Like the painter Edward Hopper, it moves me to attend more closely to the lonely, to those who wait in the corner with the curtains nearly closed. This is why I don't think beauty is an abstract concept. It is certainly ambiguous, elusive, difficult to capture, but it is also deeply bound to reality in a way that can cut through abstract categories. As Wendell Berry writes in his little book on the poetry of William Carlos Williams of Rutherford, when Williams denounced ideas apart from things, disembodied ideas, he was speaking as a doctor who treated his patients as individual persons, as neighbors, rather than as cases or types. The doctor who was a neighbor, who was a poet, is well placed to see how in the dematerializing, though materialist, modern world, the individual person, place, or thing is forever disappearing into averages, statistics, and lists. But Williams does not wait with his compassion and imagination until the wagon load of abstract categories comes lumbering up. You gotta love Barry. I'll offer another example from visual art. I served as a chief resident in my residency. It was an honor in some ways, just despairing in others. But when I think about these 2005 sketches by Marie-Michelle Ponce, drawn while she was spent months in a rehab hospital, I look back on that title with a lot more trepidation. Much of my medicine has been marked by the crossed arms and crushing stare of this physician on the left, titled Le Grand, the Chief. This is a piece of art. It's a mere sketch, really. But as a set of works, I find them beautiful. And they have moved me to want to practice differently, not flattening the vulnerable into the floor under the weight of my clinical gaze, but like the healer on the right, leaning down like a mother to support, cradle, envelop, and accompany her patient. It is titled My Nurse, Jean-Michel, Without Chatter, Returns Life to Life. I literally carry my body differently after seeing these two sketches. I try to cut down my chatter, not because of a PowerPoint slide on professionalism and body language, but because of these small, enduring, beautiful images that have held up in my heart for years. Far from abstraction, these images have ramified into my daily practices. As Dante says in the last canto of the Divine Comedy, in paradise, in the presence of God, quote, I changed by seeing. And this change that comes with seeing is not something that only happens to individuals, but can transform the actions of an entire community. I've spoken about this before, but I think it's worth repeating again. Consider among Time magazine's top 100 most influential images of all time, 25% of which capture bodily injury in some way, David Jackson's 1955 photograph of Emmett Till. And I just a warning here that the following image and story is a graphic one. Emmett Till was a 14-year-old African-American boy who was accused of whistling at a white woman in Money, Mississippi, in Jim Crow era South. Emmett was kidnapped from his home, tortured, shot in the head, and dumped in a local river. The two white men responsible for Emmett's death were acquitted by an all-white, all-male jury, despite admitting to the murder afterward. Jackson's photograph is widely credited as sparking the civil rights movement. And it is worth highlighting for many reasons, one of which is that it was posed and planned. designating it as a work of art of a richer order than other shots time featured in their top 100, which rely more on serendipity than composition, which in this case is masterfully executed. The photographer, David Jackson, was also a Black man, and I think understood what needed to happen here. All perspectival lines converge on the focal point, the face of the mother, Mammy Till, who gazes at her son. Our eyes follow hers to Emmett in the foreground before spilling back, bewildered and undone, into the eyes of the father, who looks at us as if asking, "Do you see? What then will you do?" Miss Till said, "Let the people see what I've seen," and made the decision to widely publicize Emmett's funeral as open casket. That funeral, along with the publication of this photograph, forced the world to wake up to the brutality of American racism. A photograph, a work of art, demanded moral transformation in a community. I'm nearing a conclusion now. I've been thinking about beauty and healing for a long time. And duration of thought doesn't necessarily equate to the quality of those thoughts, of course. I drew on several things I've already written about and thought about today to try to assemble this seminar about beauty's capacity to change how we see and attend, the problems of the contextual significance of the art and medicine, the problem and promise of beauty as an ethical category. I grew up training as an artist before choosing medicine. I started underground art appreciation groups in medical school. I tried to work poems and artwork and music into my time as a chief resident leading the clinical team. And I'm deeply grateful to be a part of this community here, as well as communities like the Medicine and Art of Ethics Symposia with Columbia University's Center for Clinical Medical Ethics, all trying to bring together clinicians, artists, theologians, philosophers, ethicists, healers, to wonder together what role beauty has in this work of healing. And in that work, I continue to deeply believe in the witness of the beautiful. But I have to confess, it is difficult for me to articulate how it heals the world. I'm reminded of the opening lines of Tunisian-American poet Laila Shati's poem, Echo. All she lost at once. Her mouth could no longer offer at breakfast apricot. Acerbic syllables on the tongue. Acquiesce was gone, allure and ardent. Ache refused to be named, but remained a thorn in her breast. She couldn't say it, couldn't say come closer, couldn't say cock or covet, blessing or blue. Losing beauty didn't so much upset her. It was a word which lessened the thing itself. Desire was never enough for her, despair too. This seminar is only the beginning of a conversation, I hope. Today's examples betray my attention to artwork and poetry, but there's so much more to say about how the beautiful works outside of the world of artwork, outside of the world of health humanities. 2 weeks ago, a patient told me that his life was essentially transformed by a kind of pilgrimage he made to a particularly beautiful location. I asked him what it was about the beauty that healed him. He paused, gathering his thoughts, then looked at me and said, quote, "The sad part is still there, but the bad part is gone." The sad part is still there, but the bad part is gone. Beauty clearly made a difference in this patient's outcomes, just not in the language of patient outcomes. It didn't wait on the wagon load of abstract categories like outcomes to come lumbering up for healing. To close, Plato said that when we come across beautiful things, we are reminded of how our soul might sprout wings to ascend. But I think if any account of the beautiful is to have transformative, transfiguring power in the medical mind, inspiring an ethic that equips the healer and serves the suffering, then it must be an aesthetic capable of quiet descent into desire and despair alike. One that does not sprout wings to escape to the light, but must first, like Jack Gilbert's poem, reckon with the sorrow and the slaughter. This is the beauty Dostoevsky famously said would save the world. And friends, beauty has already saved the world. through an encounter that does not present the image of one with arms outstretched in flight, but arms nailed down in passion. Whether beauty will heal the world is another matter. The artist Gerard Richter, himself an atheist, said, "Art is the highest form of hope," a statement he made in front of Matthias Grunwald's Eisenheim altarpiece, with Christ's body utterly broken, hands bent and writhing. It remains a deep mystery to me why some of Christ's wounds are present in his resurrected body. The wounds in his hands, feet, and side, while other wounds from the scourge or crown of thorns were apparently healed in the resurrection. And this is precisely the place I go when I wonder if beauty will heal the world. A Christological aesthetic for medical ethics that begins and ends with wounds. Simone Weil said that beautiful things are small tears in the surface of the world. That quote I shared earlier that Elaine Scarry uses. Small tears that pull us through to some vaster space. Christ's wounds are like small tears in the surface that pull us through to some vaster space. They're tears that let the light out, so to speak, as Grunwald masterfully imagines in his altarpiece, as light literally springs from Christ's wounds. Utterly gratuitous in ways that subvert our expectations of beauty as merely that which is harmonious, symmetric, bright, or whole. Here is a vision of the beautiful for the healer that unfurls into eternity, not with bright wings, but wounded hands. As A.R. Ammons writes in his poem, The City Limits, when you consider the radiance, that it does not withhold itself, but pours its abundance without selection into every nook and cranny not overhung or hidden, when you consider that birds' bones make no awful noise against the light, but lie low in the light as in high testimony, when you consider the radiance, that it will look until the guiltiest swervings of the weaving heart and bear itself upon them, not flinching into disguise or darkening, when you consider the abundance of such resource as illuminates the glow-blue bodies and gold-skinned wings of flies swarming the dumped guts of a natural slaughter or the coil of shit, and in no way winces from its storms of generosity, when you consider that air or vacuum, snow or shale, squid or woof, rose or lichen, each is accepted into as much light as it will take, then the heart moves roomier. The man stands and looks about. The leaf does not increase itself above the grass, and the dark work of the deepest cells is of a tune with May bushes, and fear, lit by the breath of such calmly, turns to praise. Ammon is following the psalmist. Oh, worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness. Fear before him all the earth. That is the only beauty I know to turn to. It is not an answer to the question of whether beauty will heal the world. I can assure you beauty will not heal the world by putting artwork back on the cover of JAMA. I suspect it will heal through inspired artists, empty alabaster jars, and glasses filled with wine, labeled by the powerful and productive as a waste of time. I suspect beauty will heal through story, through silver apples, plucked with a childlike heart, eager to bring back to and hope to our neighbors, and for the wounded for whom we have been given new eyes to see, precisely because our vision of healing has been shaped by kneeling in quiet places, bowing before the wounds of the one who is truly worth all the years of sorrow that are to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Brewer. I suspect I'm not alone in among the listeners and participants in finding my heart kind of longing to see the beauty that is there, and also just recognizing how much I'm shaped by and contribute to all those patterns of efficiency and abstraction and control and cultivating my private garden and so on. Bezalel and Aholiab, they were special guys. There were two of them. And then it says the other craftsmen. So there was some more, but most people brought offerings, and then they came to the tabernacle.
Yes.
And so I guess a starting question would be for you. And by the way, to those listening, if you have questions, you can send them, or just use the little reactions button to raise your hand, and I will call on you in a minute. We have a couple questions in the chat, but I guess the first thought is, for those of us who are definitely can't imagine ourselves as Behalel or Asolia or among the craftsmen. What do you think is like ways of bringing offerings to help those guys, those men and women, do what God's gifted them to do?
Yeah, I think this is something I think Lewis Hyde engages masterfully well in his book, The Gift. If listeners are interested in reading more, it was one of David Foster Wallace's, as I understand it, great writer, one of his big influences. But he talks about how the artist must participate in this world of commodification, in which they have to make money and make a living, and they're participating in an economy that sometimes renders their work and their goods difficult to understand in the kind of generative way that you see on display in Exodus. Meaning that the work of an artist is, he would argue, by its very essence, a gift. It is only ever a kind of giving out and outpouring with no expectation of return, which is what I think makes that passage in Exodus so fascinating. Is it almost, it calls for the community to support the artists as a kind of patron, a sort of lineage of patronage. And that, I think, is at least a starting place. I think Hyde would say it's having eyes to see the artists in your midst and taking very seriously what it might mean to support your neighbor who is an artist, to do their good work. That's where my mind goes.
Thank you. We have a question from another alum, Jack Horton. Jack, good to see you.
Oh, Jack, yeah.
And Jack asks, given the importance of beauty as you've talked about it, how does a medical student on the wards engage with it so as to make themselves sort of open to being shaped by it? And then are there practical ways you could think of bringing along others on the wards in that endeavor?
Yeah, that's a great question. One that could obviously occupy a whole hour. There's a small group started with medical students, and one of the sessions we focus purely on beauty, on recovering wonder in the experience of medical training. And I'll never forget, this is probably 5 years ago, is just the simple act of carrying something like a stone in your scrub pocket. Some other folks have told me about this, just the beauty of the rosary hanging around their neck when they have their scrubs on. Tactile, physical reminders of to kind of wake up, so to speak, to pay attention to beautiful things you might see. I know that might sound a little bit cheesy or a little bit too simplistic, but that is at least a starting place, trying to be creative about how you embody this kind of way of seeing in the hospital. When I led our clinical team, I really would. I would sometimes open with poems, and I found that was almost always warmly received. People were thirsty for the flow and utilitarian dryness of the efficient rounds to be disrupted. And that takes, I recognize, a particular kind of courage. That's not me claiming courage. Don't hear that, but it takes a certain level of risk that especially if you're lower on the hierarchy, to disrupt the flow of rounds. I think I think working to reflect publicly on beautiful things that have changed you, which is actually really hard to do because of this walled garden problem. These experiences are often very private, and that's also a tension. C.S. Lewis is very clear that certain things need to stay hidden, that not all beautiful things need to be shared. Which is what I think makes the silver apple idea very interesting. He's not carrying back 10 apples, it's just one. Lots to say there. It's an important question.
Yeah, Brewer.
Yeah.
This change of direction here, but what do you make of art? What do you think about art that's displayed in clinical spaces as you've observed it? And you now with your partners have a space that over which you have authority. And there's others on this call that do as well. We all in our own ways have some scope of influence on what is visible anyway. I realize beauty's not limited to what's visible, but thoughts on how to lean in, like help for us don't have imagination for that.
Another vast topic. The built environment in patient care and the aesthetics of built spaces. And there's a whole, as you might expect, like body of literature on this, and that in general pushes towards kind of vague nature shots, pushes towards abstract shots for artwork that's in hospitals or in clinical spaces. You can read that study online. I should have memorized it, and forgive me for not knowing chapter and verse, but the famous window study that patients heal better who have a window to a tree, heal slightly faster than those who have a window to a parking lot, who heal slightly faster than those who don't have a window at all, which has a lot to say about how we design spaces. In our clinic, we've been we have artists who are our patients decorate the clinic, and that's a wonderful gift, right? And I think it echoes something that you see in the call for arts-based interventions in healthcare research, which is to let the artist's voice remain in the published material. This would be a whole separate kind of point to make, but just that when I've surveyed some of these art in research interventions in clinical care, especially the AMA Journal of Ethics theme issue in arts-based interventions in healthcare research, one of the most fascinating takeaways I took from that whole journal was that the researchers lamented that they had to strip away some of the artist's content because it didn't meet the criteria of rigorous medical research. So I know that's slightly askant from the question about the built environment, but I think it gets at a point, which is that it may take risking a kind of boldness of particularity. I mean, I think one of the marks of bad art is that it's very vague, but good art can be ambiguous, and ambiguous is different than being vague.
Brewer, one more, it's not every day we get a chance to hear from somebody who has, and I'm not puffing you up, but you have, this has been important to you for a long time. You've thought a lot about it. You spend a lot of time gazing on, taking in art. I mean, any counsel for those of us that let's say we're going to go enter a museum and we're trying to avoid that private experience thing, but we're also trying to take steps to stretch our muscles of appreciation and paying attention. Any counsel about how to go into a museum or some place where we're conscious that this is a piece of art? Yes.
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say the first thing that came to mind is risk memorizing poetry and memorizing scripture that has moved you. I mean, I think that's something we forget. The authors in 30 Poems to Memorize Before It's Too Late, in their introduction, say, we memorize poetry not because it's a cute trick to pull out at a party, but because the things that we hide in our hearts change us, and they change our outward orientation to the world. T.S. Eliot says, whatever you draw on when you're on the train ride home probably marks your life. That's a fascinating statement. So what does it mean to hide something beautiful in your heart that you can draw on? Precisely when you don't have anything there to draw on. For the art museum, I think you got to treat it like a book or like a movie. So meaning avoid the momentum and flow of the crowd. Find a work that just strikes you, that just hooks your mind, and just risk sitting there for 20 minutes and seeing what happens. That's why those benches are there.
Thank you. We're going to take one more question from another alum who with me is in Phoenix at the Catholic Medical Association meeting. And that's Dylan Stoll. Dylan, there you are. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Brewer, thanks for your great talk. And
nice artwork behind you, by the way, Dylan.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. I don't see anything mended with gold, but thanks for a great talk that has obviously intertwined a lot with your own personal, spiritual, intellectual, professional journey. I was struck by your story about taking care of the artist who said, "That's all nice, but I came here because I'm in pain." And I wonder, do we as doctors have any role in helping patients to recognize the beauty in their stories, in their lives, maybe even in their sufferings? And if so, how can we help to do that?
Yes, thank you, Dylan. It'd be fun to hear you answer that question, knowing what I know about you and as a poet and lover of the beautiful. But I think when I think back on that encounter with that artist, I think it was me trying to pull beauty out of her story when she was not, that was not what she was looking for. Whereas I think the other story I shared, that patient was struggling to articulate exactly what happened in this transcendental experience in this particularly beautiful location. And it seems to me an act of the work of healing in that moment to ask something like, what was it about that beautiful experience that healed you? So I guess to answer your question, I think maybe that's a question like that is a way where it's sort of helping to draw out, helping a patient to articulate, to recognize what has happened to them. So yes, I think we have a role, but it's that whole, that's why I think that My Epic song is so important and really kind of haunts me. Like, this is not a blessing yet. It is not beautiful to say it is. And in some sense, you're kind of playing call and response. You're playing jazz with the patient in front of you, playing off and honoring and respecting the wound they're sharing with you. You're not calling it beautiful too early. You're not mending it with gold too early.
Thank you again, Brewer.